recording. Yeah, I think we can start.
All right. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to people joining from different time zones. We welcome you to the ACLiSA Speaker Series Author Talks, where we invite writers, illustrators, publishers, and creators of children's and young adult literature in South Asia to discuss their work, their influences, and collaborations. It highlights and brings into academic discourse the trends, concerns, and public impact of children's literature um, within the contemporary social milieu in South Asian countries and aims to create a space for dialogue between the creator and the researcher. ACLiSA also aims to celebrate the incredible cultural and linguistic diversity of South Asia and the many CYA literatures that are produced therein through this series. So, in that spirit, we are very, very excited for today's speaker, who will be introduced by Titash, our moderator for today. What do I say about Titash? She is a co founder of ACLiSA, a good friend, a fellow researcher. She's also a PhD student at the University of Chicago, and she's working on children's periodical from colonial India and historical ideas of reading. So, without further ado, over to you, Titash.
Thank you so much. So I'm just gonna introduce Professor J. Devika. When I got in touch with her, she was very, very gracious and she was very prompt in accepting our invitation, and I was really thrilled. She teaches and researches at the Center for Development Studies at Trivandrum in Kerala. She's a cross, she's a border crosser, according to her, and a smuggler operating between social science disciplines, humanities and research and translation, academic and non-academic writing, writing for children as well as non-children. She writes in Malayalam and English and is a part of the feminist group Althea. She maintains a memorial website of writings by and of first generation educated Malayali women, Swatantravadini .in. I think I pulled up the website if you want to look that up. She translates literature from Malayalam to English and social science theory from English to Malayalam. At present, she experiments with feminist fairy tales and writing fiction focused on climate change, but essentially blurring the boundaries between science, humanities, and discussion of ethics for children. Her talk title for today is Feminist Struggles and Fairy Tales, Writing Kunhuthee. So I think you should all join me in in extending a warm welcome to Professor J. Devika. Just to take and just another moment for the housekeeping rules. The talk will be about 40 minutes long with Q&A for 20 minutes at the end. Please keep your audio and video muted for the duration of the talk. You may type in any questions and comments in the chat in the meantime, and we will address them at the end of the talk. Please refrain from using any language that may be offensive to any individual or community. Please be respectful and polite. The live caption will be enabled. If anyone wishes to disable or enable it, personally can do so, but on our end, we will enable it. The talk and the Q&A will be recorded, so please keep your video off if you do not wish to be recorded. The video will be uploaded to our YouTube channel and the link will be sent to those who registered. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Professor J. Devika. Over to you.
So thank you, Titash. Thank you, Devika, Anupama, all of you for inviting me. You probably, do not, you were very warm in saying that I responded promptly to your invitation, and that was not, a coincidence, or that was not just me being nice. It's also me being feeling rather, loved because I am not just a social scientist. I'm a historian by training, and I'm a feminist social scientist. Most of what I write in this part of my life is social science in Malayalam, English, across different registers of the language, not just the academic register, but many other registers as well. But I started off as a children's writer, and at the age of say 19, that's what I wanted to be in life. I really wanted to be nothing more than a writer for children. And then, you know how life is, it pushes you into paths that you never thought you're going to take. I never thought I'm going to be a historian or a social scientist. I never wanted to do that kind of work. I wanted to write for children. And, in some ways, I think I was also resisting, the fact that one had to exit childhood at some point. So maybe, in my unconscious mind, I was trying to keep, thinking of a public mainly of children. I don't know if that makes sense. Public of children. But whatever it is, I wanted to address a world of children. Maybe that's the right word. A world of children, and I wanted to just stay there. I really wasn't interested into getting into an adult world. Of course, very soon I realized that you really cannot. You really have to have your foot firmly planted in the adult world. Your senses have to be sharp. Your mind and your all your senses, inner, outer, have to be sharp if you want to write if you want to write responsibly for anyway. So that's the reason why I took up this invitation so quickly. So today I thought I will speak up as both a historian, and I've done some work on regimes of childhood in my region of India, which is Kerala, which is, of course, as all of you know, in South India, far away from, well, still far away from mainstream India in some ways because of the kind of exceptionalist discourses that have, covered it. But nevertheless, my work has been on Kerala mostly, and I've looked at childhood as it evolves. I've done some little work on the regimes of childhood, on how the state imagines childhood and the kind of machinery that it sets up to in support of that kind of childhood. So, in a sense, shaping childhood. And I believe that there were 4 different regimes across time from the 19th century to the present. And yes, and I want to think a little bit on children's literature as it was shaped in these different regimes, and what that might mean for children's literature in the present. So, what kind of children's literature would we want now? How would one imagine that? So, as we all know, the genre of children's literature actually contains many different subgenres. Say, for example, fables, folk tales, fairy tales, and none of this is essential in any sense, in the sense that there's nothing in these that make children their readers necessarily. So folk tales, fables, fairy tales, all are, at least at one point of time, used to be heard and read by adults. So there was nothing that really tied them exclusively to children, at least till 18th century in Europe. In India too, of course, there were children's kind of stories that even heard were mostly, a lot of nonsense, nonsense writing, folk nonsense was the stuff of children's songs and so on. And it was not, and there was some stories that children heard early on in their lives, but these were also tales that adults enjoyed. So I don't think there was a good way to mark out children's literature in any firm sense earlier. And we all know about fairy tales in Europe, and that they were not really, children's literature until 18th century. There's a lot of historical accounts about that. So I want to think how that was in Kerala, how different subgenres took over the space of what was recognized as children's literature at in particular, when certain regimes of childhood were in force. So I don't mean to say that these 4 regimes that I talk about, at least 3 regimes that are major regimes that I talk about, happen in some linear fashion with one completely overtaking the other. No, that was not the thing, not the case. The aspects of earlier regimes persisted in present regimes. So that was well known. So I kind of, each of these regimes of childhood relied on a distinct notion of the child and childhood, and with quite distinct consequences for gender, for example. So the first of these regimes I locate in the 19th century, in the mid to late 19th century, and it lasted well into independent India. So it had a long, very long life, at least until the early decades of the the post-independence decades, the 50s and 60s. And they continues to be there in popular children's literature, very much so. This regime I call responsible parenting. So this was first proposed for modernizing native states in Kerala. Kerala is composed of under the British, Kerala was divided into 3 parts. 2 of these were native states and well known for their modernizing initiatives, such as Travancore and Cochin. And the northern part of Kerala was Malabar, and this was under British rule. So this regime of childhood, which I call responsible parenting, actually was focused on these native states, because the native states were keen to modernize and set up and create a kind of national subject who would be industrious and docile politically. So the child was, in this regime, the child was conceived as a nucleus of potential, a kind of a seed, which the parents were to really invest in through a stable marriage and properly gendered household. So the child's internality was to be shaped without much physical punishment. This is very important. It's not as if sovereign power had left the family, or the modern family was devoid of sovereign power. The father was definitely the repository of the certain tamed, modern sovereign power, but the family was supposed to be shaped by the disciplinary power wielded by the mother. So this is the modernizing family, and this family was supposed to be the basic requirement for raising a child who would be, the potential, realizing the potential of this seed that the child is. So the goal was to turn the child into an industrious subject who would be capable of governing themselves. So that's the important thing, governing themselves. These are self-governing subjects, believed to be basic to a liberal society, and of course important for the nascent capitalist orientation of these states. So, and entrepreneurial subjects who would govern themselves. So in this phase, it's very interesting that this phase is also marked by a great interest in fables from Europe. So Aesop's fables. Aesop's fables are everywhere. And then if you look at the literature of the 19th century, early 20th century, school books are full of Aesop's fables. Everything and selected stories from the Panchatantra. I mean, the criterion of selection is that they should fit the modern subject. They should fit modern power. Not modern power. They should fit modern power. So that is the criterion. That is the criterion of the for selecting from the Panchatantra or the Jataka tales. And interestingly enough, this kind of writing, there was not much difference between writing this literature. So the literary imagination of these was essentially pedagogic. So the line that was divided pedagogic literature from children's literature, that was very thin. That was very thin. It is still the case for a very large section of the children's literature market. We all know that. So a lot edifying tales. So biographical stories. So the story of Washington, the childhood of great people. So these are all Vivekananda, for example. Vivekananda, and just a sec. Vivekananda, all that happened in this period. So you can see regularly, and women authors were advised not to get into literature per se, the mainstream literature, but limit themselves to children's literature. Because women were supposed to be naturally endowed with the ability to instruct children. And anyway, their dharma was also supposed to be oriented towards family and shaping internalities and so on, children's internalities. So many authors of this time, the translators of Aesop's fables, with the editors and selectors of tales from the Jataka or the other Indian repositories of fables, they were all most often women. So figures like Teravathammalam, B. Kalyani, these are all people, and they are writing their translations or their retelling of these fables were also included in textbooks and so on. So again, as I told you, this drawing, and yeah, though this was meant for children, clearly these were not originally written only for children. That's there. So the second, this is a kind of, but then you can already see that this is really going against the grain of whatever was there for children. Whatever that addressed the child. So in this traditional Savarna kind of context, the child was always, the child was addressed with tales from the Puranas and so on. That's the kind of reading that the child was expected to do, or rather listen, the story that children were expected to listen. And very often the relationship between the teller of the tale or the parent or the caregiver and the child was not a pedagogic one. It is much more of what is called Valsalya, the whole idea of Valsalyam. Valsalyam is a kind of love in which the giver, the love, the primary agent, that is the giver, takes great pleasure in offering love. Valsalyam is like that. Valsalyam does not really try to shape the child. It's the other way around. Valsalyam is an emotion that the caregiver feels when they take care of the child. So taking care of the child is experienced as pleasure. So that kind of provides a tiny, a tiny kernel of critique of the pedagogic mode of writing children's literature, which accompanied the responsible parenting childhood. Now, the second, so this critique actually grows, I argue, into a second regime of childhood, which I call romantic childhood. Now, romantic childhood, interestingly, was not really focused on the state. In fact, it was a critique of responsible parenting, an implicit critique, even if not an open critique, whereby many important, and it came from the literary field. This is also interesting, It did not come from pedagogy. It came from literature. So all these works are actually written by well-known literary authors. So there, the child emerges in a very completely different fashion. Again, these are not books that exclusively address children. These are books about the child as much as it is for the child. So I have personally, there are many examples one can give, but in each of these examples, the child is really the source of great, potential, in the sense that the child is not a seed that has to be nurtured to, in order to, the child need not be shaped in one way or the other. The child contains a certain potential that only has to be released. And this potential is about a deep moral sensibility. The child contains in them a kind of goodness that would blossom by itself if only the state and other authorities did not really interfere in it. So someone like a good example I would offer is a very famous and very well beloved poem called Ammu in the Artingutti, which means Ammu's little goat, baby goat. And Ammu is a little girl, the oldest daughter of a poor tenant family, agricultural family. And she adopts a little goat. And this goat, and she's very maternal. And this is the interesting thing. Ammu is already feminine. She does not have to be. So this biological foundationalism that is quite central to responsible parenting does not exist here. Ammu is already feminine, already intensely feminine, intensely maternal. So she's already taking care of this little goat and treating it as her son. And, she's willing to suffer for the sake of the son, because this guy goes and, eats up, basically nibbles at, her father's crops, etc. And the father gets angry with the goat, and instead of beating the goat, he actually beats the girl. She takes it, she says she's willing to take it. And almost the thing is, she's such a perfect adult, she's so perfect that, and the compassion that, that is in her is actually so deep. And Taliyat, the author is K.S.K. Taliyat, who's of course was also a great follower of Sri Narayana and Sri Narayana Guru. And the idea of Anupama, Anupama means deep compassion. So the kind of deep compassion Ammu feels for her animal, so that becomes actually an equalizer. So when the goat is bought by the landlord to be slaughtered at his son's marriage feast, Ammu actually finds the courage to confront the landlord. And her deep compassion is so powerful that it actually converts the landlord. And he returns the goat. He returns the goat to Ammu, and also agrees that no meat will be served at the wedding at all. So you see this, that kind of compassion that you find in children then, which is in them, which is not in Taliyat's view. It is not something that adults have taught her to do. In fact, it's something that adults are perpetually telling her not to do. So her compassion is a kind of fount that actually, what should I say, erupts against adult attempts to stem it, and equalizes the tenant, a farmer, and their landlord, like that. So this kind of, and all the poems in that volume are, many of them, the protagonist is a little girl. And the little girl seems to have much greater depth. Has the kind of ethical, moral depth that one would expect of adults. So this is romantic childhood for you, because it's not about, it doesn't talk about power at all. It is set in worlds where children make a big difference, because they have this fount of, compassion, love, patience, all these qualities that make up the ideal subject in the Sri Narayana imagination, Sri Narayana ideologies, imagination, ideological imagination. So that kind of, those values are already there in babies, in young children. And of course, little boys are accepted. The only people in that home who actually behave like children. There's a story about a little boy playing, and he's very busy about his business. What is this guy's business? And this guy's business is playing with a whole bunch of toys. And the only home which has a male protagonist, a child, a little boy, is actually about a child. In all the other poems where the protagonists are female, the child, it's a little girl, not a little boy. The little girl seemed to be much more capable of, putting up with, in fact, even confronting power with the power, with the strength, on the strength of their ability to be compassionate. So this is the second kind. And now this is, as to be expected, this comes on this kind of poetry burgeons around the middle decade of the 20th century, that is just before independence and soon after independence. So there is a way in which the child in India is being taken back, from colonialism and reimagined as anew. And in Kerala, definitely, this is also critique of social and community reformisms, which kind of rationalize childcare and tie it to the whole project of nation building and the creation of productive subjects for the nation. Now, the third regime of childhood, which I identify, could be called aspirational childhood. So this started with mostly the Malayali middle class and the upper classes, but you can see the author is K.S.K. Thaliyat. I will type in later, the name of the author. So the third regime is called aspirational childhood, and the origins of this were largely with the upper middle class and middle class in Kerala. And now, of course, over the decades, it's actually become almost universal. So it's very interesting. There is a visible inconsistency at the heart of this project. So on the one hand, in the discourse, the way children are projected in the discourse as already agential, ambitious go-getters, who are ready to take on, the opening global opportunities in the global world. So just waiting to grow up. So it's very much a neoliberal subject with a number of potencies and agencies already there, which are just waiting to take on the world. So they're kernels of the neoliberal subject, really. And parents in this frame are facilitators. Now, in the first frame, parents are nurturers. In the second frame, they're hardly there because children need to be left alone, according to romantic. But in the third frame, they are actually facilitators. And so this is the discourse of childhood, the way children are projected, but actually how children are treated in it is very different. There is a far more, much more almost penal control over children's time, children's energies, children's interests, a kind of molding. So children are treated actually as raw material to be turned into adults or human labor that can be sold in global job markets. So this contradiction is a very severe one. And I do believe it's one reason why we are seeing the aspirational childhoods also lead to a lot of mental trauma and illness among children. Part of the reason is this kind of so the parents say that, oh no, they are studying for entrance exams, they are preparing for, well, that we didn't do anything, they chose it. So it's peer pressure usually. It's peer pressure that pushes kids in that direction. Parents just think that they're facilitators and they're just helping kids to reach where they should anyway going, And children are given that option. So when they say that, okay, I don't want to be an engineer or doctor, I want to be something else, they are pulled back into the assembly line. So that's a contradiction, right? So this is kind of this is an ongoing one, and aspirational childhood is really the most dominant regime, and that is universal in Kerala almost now. And here again, if you look at the kind of children's, not literature, film. Now you have, of course, children's cinema as well, children's film or literature. yeah, you see the aspiring child at the heart of it. The various kinds of challenges, adventures of the aspiring child. So there's a movie that if you want to, get a taste of it, a good suggestion is this movie called Phillips and the Monkey Pen. Phillips and the Monkey Pen, which was released in 2013. So here you have a child who's struggling with math and you can see how the whole idea of parents as facilitators comes up, in this. So parents facilitate, they set up the context, they set up everything else, and the child, and this is very much the neoliberal child, of child in neoliberalism. So yeah, and child governance, the fourth one that I wanted to mention is actually a kind of subsection of the third. It's not really it's a sub-regime, and I call it child governance, where the state directly intervenes in families that state considers to be incapable of providing, facilitating good childcare. And therefore, the state has to step in and do something about it. Now, this, of course, is well, it's not a success in Kerala. We talk a lot about child welfare and all that, but it's not a success. It's in name. Partly, it is a show, honest truth. Only if you come and do some research on it, you would realize that it's just a show. It's a PR thing that people outside Kerala receive. So, and in fact, those structures are being dismantled at the moment because the state claims that it has to cut down. So it's a kind of an austerity situation down here. So those kinds of facilities are being reduced, and instead we have a much more securitized kind of regime coming into play. Initially, it was tracking children, trying to find out if they are under Maoist influence or Muslim extremism and so on. But now it's shifted to an anti-drug, war on drugs kind of situation. So children who are believed, and in fact, children are, a great number of children are apparently succumbing to drugs. And of course, no one is really interested in tackling the root cause of that. So there is a penal kind of regime, kind of securitized childhood, a new regime that is in place right now. So I am not sure what kind of literature is going to come out. Interestingly, there seems to be, if you notice, in these other three regimes, there is some kind of a literary imagination, right, which is somehow managing to pick up the, it's managing to kind of pick up some significant detail, and ability about society, the way society is evolving, or the ability to discern deep secular truths in society and so on. The first. But now what you're seeing is you have children's literature become a very important segment of the Kerala book market. So there's a lot of translation into Malayalam. There is a lot of, there are a lot of artists who are working, a lot of illustrators and so on, but it's actually market driven. Not really arising from the literary imagination, which has its roots in a society outside the market. That is not where this literature is coming from. It's offering a great buffet, so there are so many different kinds of writing that you can read from outside Kerala, from inside Kerala, from India, different parts of India, translated versions, lots of translations from Europe and so on. English, basically English books, so on for children. And so that's there, but that is driven basically by markets. And this is not necessarily about Kerala, right? Especially the two regimes, that is romantic childhood and the aspirational, the kind of work that came up, they focus on Kerala itself, on the Malayali child. So there is a shift there, and these are things that need more research, and why that happens, and why is the market booming, and what etc. are things that we should ask. One important reason is, of course, how the region itself has shifted in a after globalization. Malayalis are Kerala is a migration dependent society, and there is a great deal of I think interest in all kinds of writing from around the world. Partly because we also know that at some point of time we need to adapt to all these different. So that's the story. But I want to just stop by like saying that what I've been doing recently is my own work as a writer of children's books right from the 90s. I mean, I have loved to write about the lives of inanimate things. I mean, the society that they may be living together when we aren't watching. So that kind of life. I love to write. I have never written for children. They will be children in the story. Of course, the toys belong to children, the plants belong to children, but these are two parallel lives, and so these lives actually watch each other. So the narrative is about two different trajectories of living, and how they look at each other, and what they find out about each other. It's like that. So what I want to do now, however, is to write what I call healing books, healing books of healing. So which restore to the child a wholeness that is denied to it by a relentless regime that is obsessed with fragmentation in the interest of productivity. So our heads have to be immediately, somehow we have to, we have to fragment everything and compartmentalize everything before we actually secure that wholeness that can keep us healthy, in our minds and in imaginations. So I'm trying to create narratives that allow the imagination to move across the realms of science, history, and ethics. I mean, these are climate change stories. These are climate change books. I'm writing a series of these that focus on the region. So one on the sea, one on land, and one in an urban setting. So here in these books, there's a lot of science, but it's also historical figures, many important historical figures, known and unknown, and of course, and very, very strong discussions of ethics, cross-cutting. So, for example, in one of these stories, Buddhist values like mudita, karuna and mudita are two different kinds of flowers which bloom in a certain place. And the two central protagonists are initially named, they're two little girls, they are named Philia and Phobia. And in the end, they change their names to Karuna and Mudita. So it's possible then to generate a discussion on what these mean, and Philia and Phobia, obviously Greek, and they represent certain states of mind, and Karuna and Mudita are different states of mind, and it makes it possible for us to have a discussion of ethics through that, like that. But I also am writing fairy tales for specific purposes. The appropriate for times, I think, in which the gap between the rich and poor, the powerful and the powerless, almost resembles pre-modern times. And we know that there is work on fairy tales that actually tell us how fairy tales, in the world of fairy tales, it expresses the contradictions of those times. And there is research on the psychological impacts of fairy tales in allowing children to cope with, very unexpected and painful situations in life. And the world of fairy tales, of course, is full of kings and queens and princes and all kinds of talking animals and supernatural creatures. And powerless peasants probably listened to these and saw these power relations being projected in very stark ways, and the paradactycal style, which does not child speak, so to say. So it's so one-dimensional, and so like in feudal life, where alternatives to one's situations were quite limited, and class and power reigned kind of supreme, right? And magic serves to rupture the feudal confines and represent metaphorically the conscious and unconscious desires of lower classes to overcome their situations. So I use the fairy tale form to actually, because Kerala now is the way in which inequalities are growing, the way in which state power is becoming completely insensitive to democratic concerns. It is such that some kind of stories can only be told as fairy tales. So there was this terrible incident a few years back, which a young couple, a young woman who's the daughter of a powerful political leader, fell in love with a Dalit man of their own party, who of course comes from a who comes from a less, not powerful family. And they fell in love and they had a child, and the girl's father and mother got the child, kidnapped the child, held her first in illegal custody at home. And when the child was born, removed the child from her forcibly, and then trafficked her to Andhra Pradesh through the child protection machinery of the state. So this was an unbelievable, especially in Kerala, where we are all so fed on our exceptionalism. It was unbelievable. And then this child was sent away to Andhra somewhere. The parent, this girl somehow managed to escape, her home and get back to her partner. And the two of them started searching for the child. And then finally, some of us, I was a witness to this whole process because I was one of the few feminists. Because even feminists in Kerala were not sympathetic to her. They kept portraying her as this dumb young girl who was tricked into getting pregnant by this wily, lower caste man. So they wouldn't support her. So very few of us supported her. And I saw how powerful these two people were, how determined they were to get their child. And they went into public protest, and after many days of public protest, they had to get the child back. The authorities had to return the child. And that's because of their struggle. And and so the family was, they managed to get their child back. And it really, really felt like a fairy tale. Now, what I did was, as a historian, of course, I could write a history of this. And I did. I could historicize this event by pointing out the context, by pointing out the social and the historical background, and historicize this event and make it part of history, which I've already done. But I realized that history is something that contains. So immediately after this happened, there was a Indian Association of Women Studies conference in Chandran. And they were in a forum where they were trying to recount feminist struggles in Kerala. There was one session. This story was not even worth telling there. So it's as if Anupama's struggle could not fit the history of women's struggles in Kerala. So then it struck me that, well, what am I doing here? Why am I just stuck? Because this will be erased. So what I did, therefore, was to refuse to historicize. And instead, I basically tried to spin a fairy tale that preserves the struggle and the injustice, rather than just explain it, historically and be done with the whole thing. So in a fairy tale, the experience of injustice, the starkness of power, and the sheer energy of struggle is preserved so well. And so the magic of life fighting for survival and emerging triumphant in the end, is preserved better in a fairy tale, I think, rather than in a historian's tract. So I'll stop there. If you want to know more about that story, I can tell you, but I think it's time. So.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. That was great. I learned a lot and I took so many notes. I love how you have combined like a historical arc of notions of childhood and writing for children, specifically in Kerala, to your own work as a children's literature writer, not very Not a lot of people do that or can do that, and I think that was great. I would invite the audience to write their questions or sort of unmute themselves and ask questions. There's already a long question in the chat. Manvi Tandon, do you want to unmute yourself and just ask the question? Or I can read it out if that's okay. So Manvi Tandon asks, what is the romantic notion of childhood for you? What I am understanding from the goat story is that the child is all knowing, but the romanticism assumes them to be innocent. The child in the story, however, is written by what I am assuming the adult author to have very deeply ingrained notions of morality. I'm not sure about Kerala, but elsewhere I would even go on to claim it as a casteist morality. How does one assume the child who is living in the society, interacting with and using the language learned from adults to be a priori?
Just a second. Yeah, see, first of all, yeah, we're talking about fiction here. Huh? We're not talking about some sociological representation of childhood. So, the demand for exactitude is, I don't think, even fair, number one. Number two is that yes, it is called romantic childhood precisely because it is not realist. It is not realist. It does project a certain idealized notion of childhood, a certain childhood that's completely untainted by, any kind of society, that the goodness is somehow emerging, and the femininity, that is, both are emerging in Amu from within, and so on. But this is not a Savarna tale. The author is not Savarna. In fact, this is actually a Srinarayana imagination. This is an Irava, not Srinarayana, it's not Irava. You know that the SNDP movement drew upon the philosophy of Srinarayana Guru. But this is not even that. This is Kalikulam was a disciple of Srinarayana Guru. And his writing is imbued by the morality of Srinarayana Dharma. So for him, yeah, the gendered part of it, yes, it is questionable, but it was not purely Savarna. And this kind of gendered assumptions were shared by both the reformist, Srinarayana reformism, missionary writing, even Dalit, the writings of that point, anti-caste writings of this point. So it was shared across different kinds of reformism. And the romantic childhood is a kind of reaction to an excessively realist depiction of a child. The child as nothing but some kind of an empty page into which you can write anything. So this was a reaction to that. Yes. And you see, the state has nothing to do with this, because basically the author is saying that the state is not necessary. And even parents do not have to excessively raise the child and so on. So,
Yeah, Anurima, go ahead.
yeah.
Hi, thank you for that great presentation. And I just was very intrigued with how you kind of go on to talk about how fairy tales are not really, it was, of course, not really targeted towards young children. It was for both adults and young children, but it's, only because, young children kind of found it more appealing that, even today when as a children's author or even as a scholar, when we talk about that, you go to a bookshop, you see that the children's section are stacked with fairy tales. But at the same time, because fairy tales, they were not really meant for only children, there are also these subversive spaces, and this is something, a couple of us in research with, Bengali fairy tales, we've been looking at how it also has a much more violent,
Yeah.
subtext and, a much more, things that are questioning, the gender roles, and, it's questioning even body image issues and things like that, and it's very interesting how you pointed out that, one of the stories that you kind of rewrote in the garb of a fairy tale because you couldn't, you wanted to bring that universe without really being preachy. So, I just wanted to know a little bit more about that entire idea of how you began to use this entire structure to talk about very, very deep issues.
And we all know, for the when fairy tales were deemed to be appropriate for children, there was a lot of editing that was done to fairy tales, right? And a lot of very fundamental changes, like many of the fairy tales that we know have roots in a much more matriarchal kind of imagination, in Europe. And they were all rewritten with, in a patriarchal imagination. So this history is quite well documented in the European, for the European fairy tale, and including by the work of in the morphologists and others. So the shift from, for example, the fairy godmother, the whole this binary between the fairy godmother and the evil stepmother, for example. Now, how that was not the case in the original forms of many fairy tales. So that kind of shift coincides with also making them palatable to children. So I want to bring back the fairy tale with all the violence in it, but in a way that would not, trigger any trauma in anyone. That is important in our times, because we view the self very differently. We don't. Our idea of self-building is not exposing the child to violence and then hoping and praying that it will survive it. And if it survived, then well and good. Otherwise, that's not how we don't really conceive of self-building like that. So while I want the fairy tale to retain violence in it, I want to do it carefully. I don't want to, like in some of the earlier versions of fairy tales that we know of. Now, two things I want to say here. One is in this book is called Kunhuthee. Kunhuthee means little fire. And this is actually the name of the little boy who was trafficked. His name is Aiden. Aiden Anupama Ajith. That is his name. Aiden is an Irish name, and it actually means little fire. So the name of the book is Kunhuthee, which means little fire. And in this, then two things. One, it resembles it also draws upon elements from the folktale, the Indian folktale. Like, for example, folktales in which there is an aggrieved person, a weak person, who goes to the powerful seeking help, and they refuse. And then the aggrieved person goes to the weakest, and all the weak gather together and work together to help the aggrieved person. It's a very common theme in Indian folktales. So this Kunhuthee also has that. Kunhuthee, one of the threads of Kunhuthee is about how the weak come together to defeat the powerful. That's there. The other thing about this form, which I mean, the way I've used the fairy tale form is the magic in this work. What the magic stands for life in all its forms. So you have Kunhuthee, which is, I imagine, as a speck of stardust coming down to the earth, seeking a womb to be born, and then meeting talking animals. In fact, the first encounter that the spark of life has is with a fox in an abandoned sawmill. And that is actually drawn from a powerful short story by a literary author in Malayalam called Shivahabudin Poithangadam. It's a poignant and beautiful story of how a fox, an encounter between a man and a fox whose entire tribe is dead, and it has no mate, and it is left alone in this jungly abandoned sawmill. So the Kunhuthee actually meets a fox first, and the fox talks to him about the world and what it is like, and and it has a way of looking at gender divides, which doesn't use human language, which uses some other kind of representation. And then, like for example, there's no word in this book as woman or man. You have only Amma Deham and Addeham. Addeham in Malayalam, I don't know, is an honorific for a man. Deham. But Deham is body. Deham. And Addeham. And Amma Deham is a mother's body. So, and then there are categories like Amma Dehi, that is mother soul. Mother soul. So some bodies are maybe something, but soul may be the mother soul, like that. So the fox looks at human beings, and this is what this fox sees. That there are some Addehams and some Amma Dehams. But there are Amma Dehis, Amma Dehis, who are neither male, who can be male, female, or some other, like that. So whatever. So the magic in this book is about life, all life affirming forces. So every human being is this. The animals can see all animals and human beings have a protective cloud of happiness around them. So when they're very protective cloud around them. So when they're happy, it shines. And when it is, when they're not happy and when they're scared, it shrinks. So this continues. So all animals have that, and all human beings, but only human beings can't see it. All animals can see it. And then, so if magic is life, the forces that seek to annihilate life are also magic. So patriarchy, for example, is an evil demon, and it's a silent demon. It's a no speak demon. And its minions are also essentially social forces, but they are like magic. So there are two minions, and one is called Nattugar enna parayum. So translated, it means, what will people say? It's one sentence actually. It's one. So the minion's name is, what will people say? And the other minion is called, what will family say? Nattugar enna parayum. So again, I'm using the paratactical style of fairy tales. In such ways. But then it's also about, it's also to try to show how bizarre and bureaucratic indifference is, for example. So bureaucratic indifference being a kind of evil force. That is cruelty. That is kind of almost fantastic cruelty beyond human imagination. So this is how I kind of weave. I hope that was useful.
There are quite a few questions in the chat. So if anyone wants to read their own question, they can unmute themselves. Otherwise, I can go ahead and do it myself. Rashmi? So Rashmi says, good evening, ma'am. I really love the different notions of childhood in the literary imaginations, and I'm especially looking forward to our climate change series. In that context, and since I am trying to work on children's climate fiction in India for my research work, I wanted to understand how you would read didactism in climate change fiction. Is it okay if I read the questions that are already there, so and you can just take them together, maybe? Or, I mean, whatever you want.
That's a lovely question.
Okay.
Yeah, didacticism is something one needs to see. This is the thing about writing. When one writes children's literature, especially climate change literature, it is also, in some ways, you also need to teach. But how you teach, I think, matters a lot. So how do you bring in, like, I draw very widely. I mean, because actually the world is such a fantastic place, right? The earth is so unbelievably marvelous. So I think the important thing is to bring that marvel into your writing. This is what I think. So this the series that I'm writing, the first one in Malayalam, it's going to appear now. It's going to be published first in a web journal and then as a book. So it's called Kadalkutti, or the child of the sea. It's about a little girl who is trapped in a society. It's a kind of a fictitious society, which of course mirrors somehow the real society, where she's child of coastal communities, and she's denied access to the sea because the beach and the sea have been taken over by the rich and the powerful and the corporates, and there's no way the child has any access to the sea. But she manages to get access to the sea, get into the sea, and she meets a lot of creatures, sea creatures. Basically, it's about, and who gets her to the sea. It is Ayangali, the Kerala's a great figure in Kerala's history, the Dalit leader Ayangali, who's very well known for his hero. He's a kind of a superhero kind of figure in Malayalam, in Kerala's history. It's really a superhero figure, driving a vehicle through streets where lower caste were not allowed to walk. So that kind of superhero figure. So he takes the child to the coast. And yeah, then there is I introduce such things as jellyfish blooms. So I fictionalize them, she goes into the sea and she starts working there as a vaidyati, or a healer who removes, all kinds of human objects that have hurt animals. So fish come to her asking to remove rings. Other creatures come asking her to remove, objects that human beings have thrown into the sea, nails and other things. These are things that have actually happened to divers. Divers have actually helped creatures, and also the menace of ghost nets in the sea. So these things can be woven into the story, and there is no need to preach at all. I think personally, I don't think we should not. And climate change fiction should remain fiction. And it's the trick. I think what my kind of criteria would be, one should be able to read this book for fun. One should be able to read the book without knowing anything about climate change at all. And you might end up learning, there are different, see, when you read it at the age of 10, you may just read it because it's a nice story. But when you read the same book when you're at 12 or 13, when you start learning things in school, and you will start reading the book differently, and the book will also take you to many different things. So what I want to do is to present a story as it is, then add an index, add an appendix, where I will, add a number of photographs, scientific explanations, etc., which a child can read when it reaches the appropriate age. Right now, a 10-year-old can just read it. And of course, about Ayangali and others, there's another female figure in it, a school teacher called Kochatil Kalyani Kutyama, who lives in the bottom of the sea. Such historical figures, I'm sure they can read more later on. But in this kind of writing, they will encounter them as these beloved figures that you remember from children's books. And as you grow, you will read the other parts as well and understand the other parts as well. And the important thing is to break down these differences between science, history, and ethics. That's what I think is crucial. The problem is, if you overload people with imagination, you might actually trigger defense in them, defensiveness. So the problem is, if you kind of give a lot of information about climate change, and it can be worrisome. It can actually make the child feel worried and sad and upset. So you need to present it in a way. So didacticism, if you ask me, should be avoided. Yeah.
So in the interest of time, I'm going to read out the questions together, what we have. So Erica wants to know, in your understanding through the different phases, nurturing, romanticism, facilitating, and modern, do you feel that there is a difference in the way that the genders are portrayed? For example, the girl in the goat story wise beyond her years, responsible, and the boy gets to play with toys and not be responsible. And how does this change throughout the different stages, regimes in your childhood, in your understanding? Stuti's question, I think, was a follow up to Manvi Tandon's question. So she asked, reading stories help children to socialize and understand and develop their own perspective. So wouldn't it be a bit problematic even when saying it's a fiction, not for sociological learning? And so then Bindu's question is um, is how do you study these fictions linking to post-colonial or contemporary world? Um, what makes adults to connect with imaginary worlds? How are you trying to study the gender and natural environment interconnectedness in the fictional film and connect it to the contemporary world? Finally, Vinita's question is, history is looked at as stories, and this is problematic. I was wondering if there is a place for writing a historical account and fairy stories are of another kind. Both need to exist.
And let's start with Vinita's. Yeah, I agree. I agree that both registers are important. But the only problem is that, when one register gets controlled by somebody, is taken over by somebody, and I mean, the register of history. And the problem with historicizing is that you kind of close the book with that. You feel you've understood, you know, you really feel when you have a thoroughly historicized understanding of some phenomena, it's very useful. Yes, it's very useful when you want to do something more, especially if you want to fashion some policy or some activism around it. It's great, but somehow the effective charge of that event, the effective dimensions of that event and the experience of power in that event might be sidelined in that because it's not central. It's understood, something you need to understand, not something you need to preserve, right? So in some ways, historicizing is very useful for us to come to grips with certain kinds of historical events, experiences. But if you refuse to historicize and you turn it into a fairy tale, which contains that political charge, it retains the affective charge. I think it is useful, especially in events where the protagonists, the central actors, the people who have been at the receiving end of power, have not received justice. So in Anupama's and Ajith's case, the child was returned, but they did not get substantial justice. The people who kidnapped those children are scot-free. The child is they are still scot-free. They are doing well in life. Everyone knows that they did this. And there's a police case. There are a couple of police cases. The police investigations has got nowhere. And these two, Anupama and Ajith, are clearly not powerful enough to pursue that anymore. So you see, in that kind of a situation, you definitely need both, not just one. So I hope that is my response to Vinita. Yes. About Bindu Shri, Bindu, I am not trying to study gender and natural environment interconnectedness in fictional film. I'm not doing that. I'm just writing climate change fiction. I'm not very sure where that's coming from. What makes adults connect with imaginary worlds? I think all adults have the power to connect with imaginary worlds. As we were discussing here, fairy tales or folk tales, Jataka tales, Panchatantra tales, none of this was children's literature. So the idea that adults connect primarily to some kind of rationalistic reasoning, to a world of reasoning, and our children connect to a world of imagination, that is probably, a bit, that is probably, a kind of, what should I say? It's part of the ideology of childhood, I think, in our times, that children are, but adults equally have the capacity to connect and children can reason actually quite well if only we let them do it. How do you link studies in post-colonial or contemporary? Yeah, I think that was what I was trying to do, you know. If you notice, I was trying to sketch out a certain kind of historical context where the state imagined childhood in a particular way and designed interventions into childhood in a particular way. And I was trying to see how, you know, the children's literature of that time somehow, you know, stayed connected to those projects. So in the first project, in all these projects, only in the second project, you don't have, in the second regime of childhood, the state is not central. But to both the others, the state is quite central. And I was trying to show you how dominant kinds of children's literature, which of course, which were not market driven. You know, now you have a market driven kind of situation where it's a market that is, when I say market, I mean the publishing industry, which is bringing you know, whole range of different kinds of children's writings for our readers. But back then, children's literature mainly originated in the region, and translations were few. Even, you know, like the text like The Wizard of Oz was translated. I did that translation. I did that in the 1990s. So, you know, so many of the well-beloved texts of English readers did not appear in Malayalam until recently, until the book market, the publishing industry has taken a great interest in it. So that's what I was trying to say. I hope I make sense. Then, yeah, Manvi. What was Manvi's follow-up?
No, so it's Stuti, and before
Stuti,
that, yeah. And
Stuti,
before that it's
yeah.
Erica. Yeah.
Reading stories helps you to socialize. Yeah. Yes, for sure. But you see, there is something like the literary imagination, which is distinct from the sociological imagination. The literary imagination is the, you know, great writers are not researchers, but they manage to pick up, you know, some of the most significant detail, right? I mean, many of the greatest literary works tell us so much about society without doing a whole bunch of research. What does a sociological imagination do? It connects individual events to broader social trends, processes, etc., through research, through collecting samples, through analyzing data, and so on. The literary imagination does not work like that. Yes, every literary author holds the authors of the greatest novels or great poetry. They hold vast amounts of information. They suspend it in the imagination. That literary insight does not come from, you know, calculating the averages or, you know, tabulating the data inside their heads. It picks up a strand of something that's evolving, emerging in society. And that is what the literary imagination is about. So, you know, there is no contradiction. And I say that fiction should be fiction, you know, in order to, for children to, you know, to learn more about the world. Fiction is important. Fiction is not make-believe or made up. It is made up. All of it, all our writing is made up. All narratives are made up. How we make it up is the challenge. The literary imagination may pick up strands of society and work on it and give us, you know, accounts that are deeply revealing of society. Sociological imagination can do the same, but in the literary imagination, the big difference is communications happen through metaphors. I mean, communications happens through metaphors, through literary devices. And that is often far more, you know, these are the literary devices are probably, they feed the imagination much more. And you have actually evidence to show from environmental psychology, research in environmental psychology, that giving people more and more information about climate change and, disaster and so on only makes them more and more defensive. And actually change, that is this defensive, climate change denial, for example, is overcome not by giving people more information, but by changing metaphors, the metaphors through which they see the world. So each metaphor is a lens. So it is metaphors that change your mind, actually. You change people's mind through metaphors. And there is evidence for this in good research on environmental psychology. So fiction can actually help sociological learning. Not sociological learning, social learning.
And then Erica's question about gender.
Yes, see, in all three regimes, they are gendered regimes. So in the first regime, that responsible parenting, very clearly the world has to be divided into properly gendered men and properly gendered women, properly gendered men, in charge of realms, the public realm, the market, and politics, and everything like that. And women in charge, properly gendered women in charge of the home. And so, in fact, many of these, the tracks that children were asked to read were, about binary representation. So the good girl and the bad girl, the good boy and the bad boy, the boy and the girl, and in black and white. So that was really the requirement that authorities found important, because they wanted the modern gendered family, binary gender-based family, the nuclear family, where the husband, wife, basically the two axes of power, the one that connected husband and wife, and one that connected parents and children. That kind of a family they thought was essential to modernization, to first the native states and then independent Malayali society, becoming post-colonial Malayali society, becoming strong, sailing free in the seas of capitalism and so on. So that was definitely there. In the second girl, it's second. In the romantic childhood also you actually see this, but what you actually see is, the girl is of course like feminine, and feminine in the sense that all these qualities that we associate with femininity, like compassion, patience, love, willingness to sacrifice, all that. These are all projected on the girl. The boy is like infantilized. The boy is like helpless creature who is only capable of play. So even if the difference is patience, etc., is not passive. If you look at the love, is not passive. Compassion, the girl's compassion is not passive. But all of this in responsible parenting, all these are passive values. All these are passive virtues. But in the romantic framing, they are all active virtues. The child is already not just woman, she's also a full agent. She's a full agent capable of making social change. While the little boy is actually an infant who's not capable of doing except playing. So yes, you could still say that this is binary gender. Yeah, no, it is. And to that extent, it is limited, and it doesn't help the woman. Yeah, yes, no doubt. But there is a difference between an agential conception of the feminine and a passive conception, an active feminine and a passive feminine. That's a difference. In the third stage, you have the gender difference is thinner. I mean, girls are supposed to be also studying very hard, So boys and girls are, there are differences. Yes, boys are boys, girls are supposed to be dressing differently, separated and so on. But the girl is also expected to be this neoliberal agent. she has to build herself. She's also supposed to have a fount of abilities, which she needs to build on her own, facilitated by parents. So the girl who's capable of entering, higher education, etc., is given as much encouragement as her male siblings, perhaps, but she's expected to also do the housework and behave like a girl. So the gender difference might appear a little thinner in the neoliberal frame, because girls are allowed to compete and develop their skills, etc. Because every human being in the neoliberal frame is imagined as a bundle of skills, and this bundle has to be developed. And girls are equally bundles of skills as boys, and they are expected to develop those skills. But they are also expected to conform to certain feminine, habits, duties, self perceptions, etc. So that's the third. So in the neoliberal frame, you'll have women who are breaking the ceiling, becoming chief engineers and civil servants, etc. But they'll still brag about how the lean-in kind of scenario. You've seen that the neoliberal feminist kind of scenes, and you can do everything. You can be superwoman. You can be a great mom. You can also be a great CEO. You can be a wonderful wife. You can be everything. So that's where neoliberal childhood is pushing female children.
Thank you so much, Professor. In the interest of time, I think we should close the session today. I mean, the amount of questions and comments in the chat are just probably a testament to how great your talk was and how engaging it was. And Vinitha has asked for your contact email, and if you'd want to.
Rashmi, just a moment to Rashmi. Yeah, see, what is the relevance of climate change fiction per se with respect to contemporary times if didacticism is taken away? I'm saying don't just write climate change fiction like that. You should be able to basically blur the boundaries between science, ethics, and history. Then you will not have, then you will not be talking just about climate change. We'll be also talking about the crisis of ethics. We'll be talking about the need, we'll be also bringing up the need to remember one's own history. You will weave all of this together in a narrative. So it won't be didactic and boring.
Thank you.
You can just share emails with my email with anyone who is interested.
Okay, we'll do that. Vinitha, if you get in touch with us, we can just we can give you Professor's email. So over to you, Anurima, if you want to close the session.
Sorry. Yeah. Thank you so much. So that brings us to the end of today's session. First of all, I would really like to thank our speaker for sparing her time and for sparing her research with us. We are so thankful to you. And of course, the lovely Titash for moderating the session. We had so many questions today, and I think we need a good moderator to kind of navigate through the questions. So thank you so much, Titash, for doing that. But I think I have to thank all our engaging audience. I know that you all have been showing us a lot of love in this speaker series, and I know that many parts from where you're joining would, it would be really late in the night. So thank you again for being with us so late. Please look out for the next, session in these series. It'll be advertised very, very soon. We also have a very active presence on our social media, our Instagram page. If you're not joined it, please, you can follow us. We are also very active on Facebook. So please, look out for announcements of future events. But yeah, thank you so much for joining. Thank you again.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed it too.
Thank you so much for joining us.